Hi again then guys, and welcome back to another stroll down memory lane, if you will, to the first Test Drive Unlimited game to feature actually one of my favourite cars in the first game, and also beyond Test Drive Unlimited, actually one of my favourite sports cars in real life as well. Not a car that I talk about a huge amount on the channel, but it's mainly because there's not that much opportunity to. It's not really featured in a huge amount of games, and considering its age now, and even back then it wasn't in every game around, it probably won't be in that many games in the future either. Now of course it's a Cadillac, the Cadillac XLR in particular, probably my second favourite sports car actually, second only behind the Pajamas Esperante in its original form, and in a similar way to that Pajamas, this car, as I said, is not in that many games. Even games like Forza, as far as I can recall, never featured the XLR, even with a decent amount of Cadillacs. Now, I think that's a shame, and I think in some ways this car was kind of ahead of its time. I think if this came out now with more modernised style, and even more importantly modernised tech, I think the XLR would have sold better in today's climate than it did back then around, 2004, 2005. Now this model in particular is the V, the XLR-V, and V of course is the performance designation of any of the fastest Cadillacs. The CTS-V, ATS-V, this one the XLR-V, and as far as performance goes, it can easily bring the heat to something like a Corvette. Now in the game, and in real life, it is expensive. More than a Corvette, for instance. In this game, it is a six-figure car, it's 100 grand, which for a Category D vehicle could seem pretty steep. And it kind of is. But what you get is a car that can do over 160 miles an hour, hit 60 in under 5 seconds, has a 4.4 litre V8, 440 horsepower stock, 424 pound-feet of torque, and even though it's a not exactly small luxury Cadillac convertible, which in itself of course adds even more weight, it's not actually obscenely heavy. It's no flyweight of course, but it's easily a match for what the Mercedes SL of the time. In fact, it's a lot lighter than something like an SL 600, which was, incidentally, a 2-ton car. This weighs 1,653 kilos, which is not bad. That's not bad at all, in fact. Now, in Test Drive Unlimited, this was more the kind of performance car that you would get a little bit earlier on in the game, because 100 grand isn't too difficult to get. The category, as I said, is a little bit lower, and I think the main reason why they set the category as lower is because although the straight line performance is pretty healthy, the cornering due to the weight and the style of the vehicle isn't as sharp as something like a Viper or a Corvette. And of course not, it's not necessarily trying to be. It is at the end of the day the American equivalent of Mercedes AMG, so it does exactly what it set out to do, which is big, lazy torque and power, great sound, lots of luxury, lots of comfort, and lots of class. And you could argue that Corvettes and Vipers don't really give much thought to class, so this is just a different category of car. I like to think of the XLR as being a Corvette in a tuxedo. That's essentially what it is. But as far as my love for the XLR goes, I think the main thing that stood out to me, even way back when I first saw it, was the looks. It's such a stylish looking car, and to me it easily looks a lot fresher than it could considering its age. You could very easily produce something like this now in the Cadillac lineup with a relatively minor design change, whereas some others of the time I actually don't think aged as well. The Escalade, for instance, of the time looks its age, and even the CTS-V, the four-door equivalent of this essentially, which I do love as well, it looks like a 2004 car. To me this does not. It aged far better as far as I'm concerned than a C5 Corvette from a design point of view, and as far as performance, it could legitimately rival Corvettes of the time. The problem is, the Corvettes in this game aren't exactly the Corvettes of the time. They're not C5s, they're C6s, and something like a Z6 of course is going to outpace this. At the same time, it doesn't have the weight advantage of something like a Viessmann or a TVR, so it falls into a little bit of a no man's land. But at the same time, I do certainly consider this to be one of those sports cars in a similar way to the Mercedes SL because of its weight, or even something like the Pajamas Esperante because it's not trying to be the fastest thing around, where to fully appreciate why this is such a cool car, it's more like a real life experience that you'd need rather than just trying to race it. And I firmly believe in fact that there are many Aston Martins, even of this time, that fall into a similar category, something like a DB9 Volante for instance. It's fast, yes, but it's far from being the fastest thing around, but it's just not the point of the car. It's the whole package. It's the look, the sound, the class, the luxury, the kit, and although the equipment and luxury level might not seem as impressive now, you got to remember something like this is around 15, 16 years old at this point. That's pretty old as far as a new car goes, if that makes sense. I think you know what I mean. But as far as its overall age, how it's aged, handling, performance-wise, I think it holds up really well. Now the pricing, of course, is from a game which itself is a lot older, so if you were to, for instance, see a Cadillac XLR pop up in, let's say, Forza Horizon 4 as an example, it wouldn't be 100 grand anymore. It would probably drop to like 50 at the most, probably less. And I think that under those circumstances, it just becomes even better, because it's one of those cars that over time definitely doesn't get worse. In fact, it becomes kind of a cult classic in a weird kind of way. And I would put this one alongside other vehicles as well, like the Vauxhall Monaro VXR, which is a car that is actually really fast, but still doesn't get the kind of credit that it deserves, even though it is still in games to this day, like the aforementioned Forza Horizon 4 title. So to me, I love the fact that this Cadillac is in the game. I understand why it wasn't in the second one, because it wasn't the most popular thing around, and even now you don't hear that many people talking about Cadillac XLRs. But I, for one, love it. It certainly would be a sports car that I would actually buy if I had the money, which I don't say that about many vehicles. But for me, I love the fact it's in the game, and that's it overall for my thoughts. So of course, if you remember driving this in the game, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Maybe go back to the first Test Drive Unlimited and check out some of these cars that you might not have driven in many years in some cases. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.